At a glance, Banavra seemed like any other bustling metropolis. Skyscrapers lining economic districts, neon-lit signs illuminating bus stops, and a humming energy that kept people alert at all hours. But beneath its paved roads and compact buildings lay a subtle inhabitant, unnoticed by most. A network of water channels, centuries old, snaked beneath the city in the form of underground rivers. These rivers carried stories as ancient as the tides, and for Naraya, they offered a hidden opportunity. While people on the surface went about their daily routines, grabbing coffee, commuting to offices, hailing cabs, Naraya moved through a set of tunnels that ran parallel to the city's abandoned subway lines. The stale air gave way to misty dampness, and the faint roar of water filled her ears. Stones etched with strange symbols marked where the subterranean waterway curved, a faint acknowledgement that others had travelled here before her. Naraya was no ordinary wanderer. She was Merfolk, a daughter of the sea who had lived in coral kingdoms and listened to the songs of dolphins. But while most of her kin accepted their watery realm without question, Naraya had grown fascinated by the possibilities found on land. She had consumed texts left behind on sunken ships, gleaning knowledge from half-soaked pages on physics and biology. Those fragments of mortal science had done more than pique her curiosity. They ignited her ambition. She had resolved to create a serum that would let her remain on land as easily as she lived underwater. Deep in the city's extensive catacombs, Naraya had established a makeshift laboratory. She had spent long hours repurposing abandoned structures. A half-collapsed storage room became her workspace, and electrical cables illegally piped from the city above powered her flickering lights. Broken glass panels from a nearby deserted greenhouse served as an improvised barrier for her test tanks, while a filched generator kept her machinery humming. She had arrived there late one evening, scaling down a ladder with the sure grip of someone at ease in the gloom. Her eyes, enhanced by Merfolk anatomy, adjusted quickly to the darkness. She heard the low whoosh of the underground flows, felt the gentle humidity. That night she unpacked delicate vials filled with glowing solutions distillations of jellyfish enzymes, over which she had laboured for weeks to harvest. Liquid reflections quivered inside each fragile container like captured moonlight. Naraya secured them on a makeshift shelf, carefully placing each vial in the correct sequence. She breathed out a sigh and ran a hand over the tips of her gills. They flared slightly, still fresh with the memory of ocean breezes, but soon she would try to let them adapt in a bold, unprecedented way. From a battered metal locker, she removed a spiral-bound notebook, secured by multiple rubber bands. Flipping through pages penned with meticulous notes, chemical structures, sketches of lung-like vascular systems, she paused at a diagram depicting twin sets of lungs, side by side, connected by a synthetic tissue. For ages, Merfolk possessed only rudimentary capacity to breathe on land, restricted to short intervals above water. But if her calculations proved correct, this new serum could extend that time indefinitely. No merperson had ever dared experiment to this extent. Merfolk traditions were conservative, especially when it came to meddling with their own biology. But here, in the city's concealed underbelly, she had the freedom to push boundaries. The next morning's light seeped through cracks in the pavement overhead. Neria woke in a cramped alcove and stretched her arms, rotating her shoulders until she felt them crack. The rhythmic drip of water behind her reminded her of the day's tasks. She had decided to test the serum again, though small miscalculations could be catastrophic. Dabbling in merfolk physiology was almost uncharted territory. Her first attempts had been modest. Verifying whether the serum weakened or strengthened her ability to remain outside water, she'd had to keep a carefully timed schedule. Each test had to be carried out in short intervals, ensuring she could re-immerse if anything went awry. Over the past months, the results improved. She could stay out of water for 20 minutes without discomfort, then 40, then close to an hour. Still, these experiments had to be done covertly. Although the labyrinth beneath Benevra's streets was deserted most of the time, sporadic explorers ventured down with flashlights and a reckless sense of adventure. Rumors of ghostly sightings and hidden vaults perpetuated local legends. If anyone encountered a strange young woman perched next to vials of glowing fluid, the entire plan would be jeopardized. That day, Nerea started with a small trial. She measured out a tinted, shimmering dose, injected it into her thigh, and set a timer. There was no immediate sensation, just a faint, warm pulse under her skin. Climbing the cracked concrete steps to a maintenance corridor, she inhaled tentatively, each breath more confident as she registered no adverse reaction. 30 minutes later, her chest felt only minor tightness. She disturbed the still water around her ankles, glancing at the timer. 45 minutes passed without panic or choking. She allowed herself a hopeful grin. "Not bad," she whispered, voice echoing off the damp walls. She checked her gill slits. They had folded themselves flatter than usual, as though preparing for dryness. The muscles around them ached slightly, an expected side effect of reconfiguration. She would need more frequent hydration breaks, but that was a small price to pay if it meant a new phase for her people. As she prepared to head back down, a flicker of light startled her. Her heart thudded. Footsteps reverberated, and she could see a bobbing flashlight beam further down the corridor. Was someone exploring? She exhaled gently, reminding herself to keep calm. She ducked behind a corner, stepping deeper into the shadows. In her Merfolk home, she had learned advanced stealth, using shadows in coral reefs to evade deadly predators. Now, ironically, she was using those skills to hide from humans in dark tunnels. The flashlight beam swept past, but didn't linger. A moment later, the footsteps receded, replaced by the quiet hush of the underground current. Nerea dared a glance around the corner, making sure the explorer was gone. Satisfied, she carefully retraced her steps, returning to the underground river that led back to her laboratory. Her pulse gradually steadied. 2 days later, she felt confident enough to attempt an extended trial with her serum. She had consulted her notes, cross-referenced her chemical calculations, and even performed a handful of analyses on lab rats she'd acquired from questionable pet store scams above ground. The rats had shown an increased tolerance to water deprivation without immediate harm, though the correlation to merfolk biology was murky. Still, the data encouraged her to continue. With renewed resolve, Nerea donned stolen clothing from a thrift donation bin, a hooded jacket, and worn-out jeans. She reasoned that if she needed to walk among humans, she had to blend in. Her reflection in a buckled sheet of metal was uncertain. Large eyes that adjusted too fluidly to darkness. Hair the color of seaweed, and faint lines on her neck that betrayed her aquatic origin. She scolded herself. She couldn't help her distinct features, but she resolved to conceal them as best she could. Early one evening, she ascended through a disused maintenance hatch that opened onto a lesser-known corner of the city. The setting sun bathed the rooftops in bronze. Car horns and chatter from the market stalls signaled peak hustle. By the time night truly fell, the city would glow with 1,000,000 incandescent bulbs. Nerea's plan was to spend at least 3 consecutive hours above ground, interacting with humans, to see if she could maintain composure. She eased into the flow of pedestrians who trudged through an alley connecting 2 busy roads. A wave of scents hit her. Roasted nuts, car exhaust, perfume, hot tar. She had read about the overwhelming smells of cities, but experiencing them firsthand was dizzying. A dull ache thrummed behind her gills. Pressing forward, she arrived at a main street. Neon signs flaunted everything from coffee shops to late-night diners and clubs. She noticed people on the sidewalk with their eyes glued to their phones, some shouting at each other over the anger of traffic. This was another world altogether, teeming with life in every crack and corner. She caught sight of a small cafe, quaint and relatively quiet, with yellow light glowing through its windows. It seemed a safe bet. Stepping inside, the warmth wrapped around her. The subdued clink of dishes contrasted with the din of the city outside. She found an empty table near the back, distancing herself from prying eyes. A weary-looking waitress approached. "What'll it be?" she asked, tapping a pen. Naraya froze momentarily. She'd never ordered human food or drink before. To blend in, she decided coffee might suffice. She had no idea how it would interact with her body, but it was a risk worth taking for the sake of an authentic experience. "One coffee, thank you," she managed, hoping her accent wouldn't seem odd. The waitress nodded and left without comment. Once alone, Naraya checked the small watch she kept in her pocket. 15 minutes above ground, no suffocating. Expanding her lungs fully, she drew in a careful breath. So far, so good. An eavesdrop on the table nearest to her revealed an emotionally charged conversation about rent prices, job difficulties, shallow heartbreak. She couldn't help feeling intrigued. Humans had so many concerns beyond currents, tides, or overfishing in their domain. Her coffee arrived. She grasped the mug, swirling the dark liquid inside. The smell was bitter, almost scorching to her heightened senses. She took a timid sip. The flavour jolted her, an unfamiliar combination of acidic tang and earthy undertones. But it was tolerable. She even felt some hidden appeal in the warmth that spread through her chest. Half an hour passed. Naraya felt sweat forming on her forehead. Her body was working to regulate its temperature, not entirely used to the dryness of heated rooms. But the serum was holding. Her breathing, though slightly laboured, remained steady. The hood concealed most of her hair, and no one seemed to notice her unusual features in the dim lighting. An older man at the counter regarded her over his newspaper, but she pretended not to see him. She thought about her people, her home. If she perfected this serum, Merfolk could mingle with humans. It might open channels of learning, maybe even alliances to save the polluted oceans. Yet she knew not all Merfolk would agree. Some believed humans had already proven themselves untrustworthy by systematically warping marine ecosystems. But perhaps bridging that gap was the only real solution. As if on cue, another wave of conflicting emotions washed over her. She remembered her father's disapproval when she first mentioned studying science. "Our knowledge is as old as the sea," he'd said. "We need no laboratories." She had argued that evolution was an ongoing process, that if they remained static, they'd be undone by changes in ocean temperature, acidification, and humanity's unstoppable push into the seas. In the end, the rift was too deep, and Naraya had chosen autonomy over tradition. She finished her coffee, left a small tip, and stepped outside. An evening chill pervaded the air. Drawing her jacket closer, she walked deeper into the labyrinth of city lights. By the time she spotted a clock on a large building downtown, nearly 2 hours had passed. Exhaustion weighed on her, but not enough to force her return underwater. Her experiment was successful thus far. In a deserted patch of sidewalk, illuminated by a flickering street lamp, she removed her watch and jotted a few notes into a small pocket notebook. Serum holding, mild dehydration, vital signs stable. People passing by shot her curious glances. Realizing the potential to attract attention, she stuffed the notebook back into her jacket. She decided one final test would round out the night. A brief conversation with a stranger, or even an exchange with a store clerk. Pushing open the glass door to a convenience store, she wandered the aisles, scanning the shelves for a purchase she might plausibly make. Bottled water sounded ironic, but her body thirsted for fluid. Pausing by the refrigerator, she selected a bottle and carried it to the counter. The clerk was a slender young man, sporting dyed teal hair and several piercings. "That all?" he asked listlessly. Naraya mustered a small smile. "Yes." Her voice was still softer than typical city dwellers, but he didn't seem to mind. He rang up the purchase, asked for payment. Naraya handed over some crumpled bills she'd found in the pockets of the thrift clothes. The clerk nodded, gave her change, and yawned. She clearly didn't suspect a thing. She thanked him and slipped out, stifling a laugh at how anticlimactic it felt. By the time she finally ended her trial and retreated to the maintenance hatch near midnight, Naraya's eyes were heavy with fatigue. She had been above ground for over 4 hours, without needing to submerge in water or gasping for air. Stumbling down the steps into her lab, she inhaled the familiar musk of damp stone, letting her body process the night. Her head buzzed from the coffee. She turned on the overhead lamp, its dull glow revealing the vials and notebooks scattered atop her table. A certain exhilaration churned within her as she recalled the fluid success of her experiment. The next morning, though, abrupt pain flared behind her gills. She awoke, gasping for breath. Alarmed, she scrambled out of her makeshift cot and submerged her face in one of her test tanks. Relief spread through her as her gills opened to the water. Perhaps the extended trial had put more strain on her system than expected. That was a lesson she'd have to note and correct. Neraya spent that day meticulously documenting her symptoms: dryness in her membranes, minor muscle cramps, sensitivity to bright lights. She tinkered with the serum composition, adjusting the ratio of jellyfish enzymes to amphibian peptides. Soon she would have to consider a bigger question: whether to share this newly stabilized serum with the rest of her people, or whether to keep refining it quietly until she was absolutely certain. Despite the valuable results, she still worried about moral consequences. Would it be safe for every mer person? Or would only the physically strongest adapt well while others suffered? She shook her head, trying not to let the moral complexities derail her progress. An unexpected development came that afternoon. She heard voices echoing in the tunnel. Sliding behind a cluster of crates, she listened. One male voice and one female voice, discussing something about maintenance records and structural issues. The words came closer, too close to be random explorers. They might be official city workers or part of the subterranean municipal crew, investigating the cause of weird power surges, as stolen electricity for the lab could have triggered an alert. Heart pounding, Neraya watched as their flashlights skimmed over the walls. She could see the city's seal on their jackets. Inspectors. If they discovered her lab, they'd definitely investigate the materials, possibly confiscate everything or expose her. She flattened herself, holding her breath. Even with her improved capacity, anxiety threatened to break her composure. Moment by moment, the pair strode past the crates. The woman ran her hand along the wall, checking structural data on a handheld device. The man shone his light across the floor, noticing damp footprints. Neraya felt a jolt of panic. They were hers, a trail leading to her lab's entrance. Crouching low, she steeled her nerve. If discovered, she might appear as nothing but a homeless occupant. But her laboratory would raise questions. Should she create a distraction? If they uncovered the evidence of her technology, the city might launch a deeper probe, bringing floods of employees, sealed corridors, or intense speculation that something non-human resided within these walls. Just as the man rested his hand on the old doorknob to her lab, the woman's phone rang sharply. "Hello?" she said, then turned to her colleague. "We need to go back. There's been a main breakup near Greenwood and they need us on site." The man frowned. For a tense moment, he hesitated, shining his light around the doorknob. Then he let go. "Let's get out of here," he muttered. Together they hurried away, their voices fading along the corridor. Neraya exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her chest. Relief surged over her. For the moment, her secret was safe. She emerged from behind the crates, scanning the footprints. Swiftly, she used a rag soaked in water to smear them all. She made a mental note to be more careful. The city's infrastructure was aging. Inspectors might become more frequent if they suspected leaks. Perhaps she needed a second lab, somewhere even more secluded. Despite the near miss, her determination burned brighter. The serum had worked, albeit with some side effects, and the potential benefits were too vast to abandon. Still, she couldn't shoulder the risk indefinitely alone. Companionship, or at least some form of collaboration, might be necessary to further refine her research. She thought of her old friend Kellyan, an inventive mer person who had once dabbled in forging alliances with land dwellers. They hadn't parted on bad terms, simply an ideological difference in how to approach human contact. Perhaps it was time to send out a message through the waterways. Maybe Kellyanne could be swayed by tangible proof of success, or at least offer guidance. That evening, Neria ventured deeper into the twisting channels. At a certain confluence of tunnels where the water's flow converged, she placed a small carved shell, etched with a coded symbol that any merfolk would recognize. It signaled a desire for a clandestine meeting. If Killian passed through the waters near Benevra, he might spot it and come. She hoped so. The path to upend centuries of tradition was lonely, and she couldn't simply declare her breakthrough from the ocean's stage. She needed help. Days passed. Neria continued to refine the serum and run short test intervals on land. She was satisfied to see no major relapse in her respiratory function. She'd even grown used to the taste of coffee, which oddly seemed to energize her. Her nights were spent adjusting chemical compounds, analyzing data, and drafting hypothetical expansions of her research. She imagined a day when a small contingent of merfolk might walk city streets peacefully, forging communications about saving the environment. With each improvement, that vision drew closer. Then came a sign. She was examining a petri dish of amphibian cells when she heard a distinctive ripple in the water outside her lab. A hush overcame her. She recognized the soft resonance that belonged to merfolk approach. Quickly, she rushed to the tunnel's edge. Kellyanne emerged from the watery darkness. Where Neria's hair was dark with earthy green undertones, Kellyanne's glistened in faint aquamarine, reminiscent of sunlit wave crests. He rested against the stone ledge, meeting Neria's astounded eyes with a mix of caution and curiosity. "So, it's true," he said softly, scanning the cables, the vials, the makeshift lab. "I heard rumors, but I had to see it for myself." Neria knelt, offering a hand in greeting. "I've made progress," she said. "Real progress, enough to walk for hours on land." He placed a webbed hand on one of the glowing vials. "Why? Are you forging a new domain, or simply fulfilling a personal obsession?" She took a moment to gather her thoughts, grappling with how best to convey her passion. "It started as curiosity, but the more I studied, the more I understood. We can't hide beneath the waves forever. The humans' industry, their pollution, it extends to our waters. Maybe if we walk among them, we can learn more, teach them, find solutions." Keelian's eyes flickered. "You trust them that much? History shows that humans exploit what they don't understand." "Some do," Neria conceded, "but some have changed. Look around at how rapidly they adapt. We've always kept to ourselves, letting myths define us in their stories. Perhaps it's our turn to define ourselves." He exhaled, sending a swirl of bubbles across the surface. Despite his initial hesitation, curiosity seeded itself in his expression. "Show me," he said. Neria guided him to her improvised workstation. She explained each step. The collection of enzymes from bioluminescent jellyfish, the infusion of amphibian peptides, the synergy that allowed her gills to retract while letting her respiratory pathways handle air. Kellyanne listened intently, occasionally shaking his head in wonder. When she described her field tests in the city above, a small grin tugged at his lips. "So, you've truly walked among them, disguised," he murmured. "You mentioned only mild side effects." She nodded earnestly. "Yes, but I'm still perfecting it. The dryness outside is harsh on our membranes. If we overextend, we might suffer permanent damage. That's why I need more voices, more perspectives, to refine the serum." Kellyanne seemed to weigh the possibility. "The elders will vehemently oppose it, you know. They'll call you reckless." "I'm aware," she said in a measured voice. "But what choice do we have? The ocean is changing faster than the tides. If we don't adapt, we risk vanishing in the wake of their factories and fishing fleets." Silence stretched between them, the hush broken only by the trickle of water. Finally, Kellyanne let out a slow breath. "All right, I'll assist you." But we must be discerning in how we approach the legates of our kingdom. One misstep and we'll have both merfolk and humans outraged. Relief washed over Neria. She felt tears well at the corners of her eyes, tears she wasn't used to shedding on land but which felt natural now. "Thank you," she said quietly. Thus began their collaboration. Killian brought advanced knowledge of merfolk healing arts and herbal extracts from sea flora. Neria integrated those elements into her existing formula. Together, they tested new versions of the serum, refining the dosages. Their synergy yielded faster results. They noticed reduced dryness on the skin and improved comfort above water. Each evening, Killian would follow Neria up to one of the deserted maintenance corridors to test. They were cautious never to roam too far or be spotted together, but their risk yielded valuable data. On one particularly quiet night, they ventured into the outskirts of the city, where fewer crowds gathered. The moon was high, luminous in the smog-touched sky. They found an abandoned warehouse with wide-open floors, ideal for practicing movement away from water. For nearly 2 hours, they took occasional sips of specially prepared water, tested the threshold of their capacity, and jotted frenzied notes. A wave of triumph overcame them. Seeing how effortlessly they walked and breathed, there was a moment when Killian, enthralled by the novelty, lifted a piece of broken glass to observe his reflection. He smiled at the sight of his own face under the haze of city lights, a setting previously unattainable. Eventually, caution returned. They moved to leave, but at that moment they saw a bright flicker, a security guard's flashlight, outside. Maybe someone had reported unusual noise. With hearts pounding, they ducked behind a steel column. The footsteps came ever closer. If discovered, house arrest, media frenzy, or worse could follow. Killian and Nelia exchanged quick glances. Silently, they retreated through a gap in the broken warehouse door. They ran until they reached the relative safety of the maintenance tunnel that led back to the underground river. Each footstep echoed a staccato of adrenaline. Once they dropped down into the subterranean passage, a shiver of relief and a sense of accomplishment mingled in the gloom. Breathing hard, Neria propped herself against the cold wall. "That was close," she said, voice trembling slightly. Killian nodded, a smirk playing across his face. "Close, but we made it," he murmured, "and it felt incredible." In the laboratory, Neria and Killian exchanged excited, breathless conversation. They recognized that the serum was nearing a milestone of stability, but they both understood that unveiling it would stir enormous change. The question remained how to proceed: offer it, secretly, to a select merfolk group, or openly challenge the elders' isolationist stance. Night pressed on, water droplets fell rhythmically, and the murky air hummed with potential. They documented their findings, fine-tuned the formula, and sealed fresh. This was no longer just Neria's solitary project. It was an endeavor shared by 2 forward-thinking merpeople, envisioning a unity of worlds that had long existed apart. In the dim light, Neria cupped a sample of the serum between her palms. Its phosphorescent glow rippled like the memory of moonlight on gentle waves. "We're standing on the edge of a future no one thought possible," she whispered. The faint thrill in her voice a sign of how far she had come from the hush of the sea's cradle. Killian placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Yes," he said, "and we've only just begun." Thus, hidden by the city's potholes above and the ancient currents below, their shared quest advanced. Each swirl of water in the underground rivers carried hidden hope, a promise of transformation for an entire species, and perhaps for humanity as well. Even in darkness, the spark of possibility burned bright, illuminating the path that would lead merfolk and human alike into a new, uncharted chapter of coexistence.